This is Creepy and Geeky. Welcome. I'm your host, Robert, and my guest today is Kat Voleur. Kat is a writer whose recent pieces are in Erie Rivers Fire Anthology and Divergent Terror from Off Limits Press. She also co-hosts two podcasts, Slasher Radio and This Horror Life. Kat is here for the last episode in my Kevin Smith series, and we're talking Tusk and Yoga Hosers. Welcome to the show, Kat.
Thank you. I came in for the best part.
Yeah. I think some would debate you on that, but
I'm sure a lot of people would debate me on that.
I mean, even I'm gonna debate you on that one.
That's
honestly
fair. I, to
uh,
be fair, I also came in, I think, for the worst part. I got the best and worst of it with this one, I think.
yeah. True, maybe
Maybe.
yeah. We'll. I guess you know what. That's what this episode's about. We'll figure it out as we go. Uh, so talking Tusk and Yoga Hosers. Tusk is arguably more of a horror movie, but it's fairly a horror comedy, I would say. It strikes a fair balance, and Yoga Hosers feels more like a comedy, just a straight out comedy. There's some horror elements to it, but it's more of a comedy in my mind.
I would agree with
we
that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so let's jump deep into Tusk. This So both of these movies I actually only watched just for this podcast. I
Oh,
love
really?
Kevin Smith's work, but these were the only two, like, so I love his View Askew stuff, his comedies so much that after watching Red State for the first time, it
Mhm.
kind of threw me off. And I was like, I don't know about this. And so it really took me a long time to sit and go, you know what? I really got to watch these. So, uh, yeah. But once I watched them, I enjoyed them. I enjoyed Tusk and Yoga Hosers. Um, I enjoyed Tusk more. Um, and because it's got those horror elements, uh, and it's a fun movie. It's bizarre, but it's fun.
For me, I think this was the first I don't think it was the first Kevin Smith movie I'd seen, but it was the first one where I was aware of who the director was. Uh,
Okay.
because like as a being younger, there was like a long period of my life before I started getting into podcasting where I would just watch stuff with like
Okay.
no information about who was doing what.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, I get
so
that.
I had seen a couple Kevin Smith movies, but it had like never really registered, and I was already I watched Tusk for the first time. I was doing I was working for the Dead Walk Online at the time. So I was already doing movie reviews when I saw Tusk for the first time. And I made a note of the director, and it was like, this guy is amazing. And I was really surprised to see his catalog of movies, because I figured there was going to be more horror stuff in there than there was.
That's interesting. Like I've never. I mean, it makes sense that eventually somebody would come to his work via, his later movies first. Especially,
Yeah.
how old are you?
I am 28,
Oh, okay. Yeah, you were
so
literally 20 years younger than me, so that makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, so that makes a whole hell of a lot more sense why you would see that one much later, or much you would see that one first and then see his other stuff potentially later. Uh
And I'm
yeah.
also not a very like I come on to a lot of horror podcasts where I feel really well-rounded because I've seen a lot of horror movies, but I've missed a lot of other genres
Oh,
like
okay.
altogether. I feel like I've seen like a lot of the big cinematic classics, a lot of Tarantino in there, like a lot of sci-fi, like fantasy, a lot of the speculative stuff, but I haven't like Yeah, so not a lot of comedies, which I believe is more of what Kevin Smith does usually, which makes sense
Yes.
because Tusk is very like as a horror movie, it's very funny. Um, and yeah, I'd consider it a horror comedy.
Yeah. 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 His yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, see, I'm kind of a of course I have 20 years on you. So it's um I grew up and I've watched horror throughout my life, but it's only within the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years that I really have deep dived into it.
Mhm.
And so before that, I was kind of more of a casual viewer. I like certain things, like, of course, I liked Friday the 13th, and I like the Scream franchise, and I like stuff that were kind of the more mainstream stuff, uh, without veering into the more the deeper ends of the pool,
Right.
and so and that's and part of that is also that because of that, when I started deep diving in, I had to go back to when I was a kid in the 80s and go back and find a bunch of stuff that I'd heard of, I'd seen in the video stores growing up, but I never watched them. So that was an interesting thing for me to go back and go, okay, well, now I'm finally going to sit and actually watch something like Reanimator, which I never saw up until just a few years ago. um
That's
so
always a fun thing is like going back and filling in.
yeah, yeah, like the Halloween franchise, for the most part, was a huge blind spot for me. It never really appealed to me, and I'd only seen like the first three when I was a kid, and never anything else after that. I think I saw H2O, because it came out in the wake of Scream, and everybody was making Scream knockoffs, and so it's been fun like doing that. But yeah, most of my movie watching has been comedies, actions, some sci-fi type stuff. Like, I'm a big Star Wars nerd,
Yeah.
but it's for me, watching a lot of that other stuff has been more important to me than watching horror stuff, and it's only been the last few years. So that's funny coming at it from different directions.
Yeah,
Because
and
I've been following Kevin Smith since the beginning. So go ahead. What were you gonna
oh,
say?
oh, it was a really weird experience for me coming because like I'd heard of Kevin Smith, I knew vaguely, but if you had asked me before I saw this to name a Kevin Smith movie, I probably could not have done it. Um, and it was really like a weird experience because there was kind of that like there was a dissonance in there because it's like I this was streaming on Netflix and I think it was the year it came out or the year after. It was um like the mid 2010s. I found Tusk on Netflix, and I was uh and there was like just this weird dissonance because it was like, oh, Kevin Smith directed this, and then it was like, is this what Kevin Smith does? And then it was like, do I know this person like as well as I think I do? And yeah, there was just there. So this was it was an interesting experience for me as well, and it was really strange because up until I knew who the director was, I'm not even sure I knew like the day that I watched Tusk. Like I think I missed who directed it altogether. And it was this really weird experience because I saw it as like this weird little indie streaming thing. And then like when it started showing up on like lists, I think What Culture and maybe Watch Mojo have talked about this like a few times for just like weird ass horror movies. And
Right.
it's like it's always interesting to see it because it's like that is very much how I saw it. But then a lot of people like a lot of my horror friends also obviously knew who Kevin Smith was and came into it from that angle. So it's definitely an interesting thing because I think if he had not directed this, I think if this had been in anyone else's hands, still probably no one would have seen this movie. It's such an
Yeah,
odd one.
yeah, it's so bizarre that definitely I think that if if he if I'm not saying that nobody would have seen it, but it's such a bizarre movie that I don't think it would have gotten nearly the amount of um watches that it has gotten, for sure.
I'm always surprised like when someone else brings it up still, because it does feel like one of those really obscure underground kind
Yeah.
of things. Just in tone and
Oh
content for this
yeah.
one.
What?
I was
Go
so
ahead.
excited to see that you were talking about this one. Not only is this like one of my favorite horror movies, I have a really tough time getting people to watch this with me. I've been pitching it on
I,
both podcasts for a long time, and no one seems interested. And my friends and family won't watch it. And
I can completely understand why. It is a really, really, really fucked up movie.
it's a really weird one.
uh it's really hard to explain too. For
It is because
anybody
it
who
sounds
doesn't
so
know.
ridiculous. Like it sounds
Yeah,
like it would be a B movie, and it's hard to explain that. Like it had obviously it has those elements and it has its more comedic moments, but it's also
right.
kind of devastating. Like, and
Yes.
it's a
Oh
lot
God. Yeah.
scarier than you think it's going to be, you know?
Yeah.
Like those horror moments hit very
Oh
well.
yeah. It's interesting though too, because this is part of the ongoing Justin Long is a dickhead in horror movies trope
Yeah,
that he plays very well. Case in point, Barbarian from this year.
Barbarian.
Um, it's it's yeah, it's very much in that same way. I love Justin Long. I've always liked him. He's such a great actor in pretty much everything he does. So it's just and again another reason why it's funny that it took me so long to watch this movie.
I,
Um,
I'm glad you brought up Barbarian. I was recently watching that with my family, which informs the cat not being allowed to pick movie night movies anymore.
yeah.
But we were recently watching Barbarian, and Justin Long showed up, and my mother was like, "Where do I know this guy from?" And I was like, "Tusk," and she just like she gave me the dirtiest look. She was like, "I don't know him from Tusk." All
We
right.
haven't seen Tusk Cat. We won't let you watch that.
It's like that's what I know Tusk. Or that's what I know Justin Long from is Tusk. And she's like, I no, not you.
Oh, like pretty much, I don't know, like any other. He's in dodgeball, you
I
know.
know. And it was so funny because I went through with my partner like just a couple days after because we covered Barbarian on Slasher Radio, so I was trying to get
Okay.
everyone I know to watch Barbarian before the episode came out and stuff got spoiled. Because if there's one movie you don't want
Oh yeah.
spoiled at all, it's Barbarian. So
Oh
I was
yeah.
like, so it was just a couple days after that I was with my partner and we went through kind of the same thing where he's like, "Do I know this guy?" And I was like, "Have you seen Tusk?"
Mm.
And it was like 20 minutes later he's like, "I've seen Dodgeball." And I was like, "Oh, that makes more sense." Like
Oh man,
I
that's
got so
great.
excited for a moment because I was like, "He knows."
You're like Tusk. That's your one thing to go to for Justin. Like, have you seen
Yeah.
Tusk? And everybody's like, no, nobody's ever
No.
watched Tusk. Oh man, yeah. You know, and the funny thing is, this cast is so weird too because you have Justin Long, but you also have his because he's playing a podcaster,
Hmm.
and I guess it's a comedy podcast.
I think it's supposed
Um,
to be a comedy podcast.
but it just seems like they rip on people more than anything else. They're just out and out jerks.
You were laughing a lot
And
harder than I was. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, and then his podcasting partner is played by Haley Joel Osment, which everybody knows from The Sixth Sense.
Even me.
And yeah, yeah. uh, and so it's so bizarre to see him sometimes as an adult. Like I've seen him in other things, and it's so funny to see him as an adult now. And having seen him as a kid, I mean, like I understand that everybody grows older and everything, and it's been 20 plus years since uh, uh, Sixth Sense, but it's still funny to make that connection sometimes.
Yeah.
And he's great in it too. He just a very like not very small, but just he's definitely the supporting actor in this.
Yeah. And he
But
he does do a great job in this.
oh yeah, yeah, he's definitely like that's the thing that I took away from that, and the other things that I've seen him in recently, is that he is still a good actor. Like He was great as a kid, and I think he's even better now as an adult. So, he definitely learned as he went and continued on. So, it's great to see him still working, and hopefully he continues to get good roles.
I hope so. I would like to see him in more stuff. I'd like to see him in more leading stuff after
Yeah,
this.
yeah. I mean, he might be comfortable just playing supporting roles. I'm not sure. I've seen him just popping up in guest starring stuff. He was on an episode or two of the Amazon series The Boys, and um, it's on a few episodes of another series on Hulu called Future Man. So he pops up on some bizarre genre stuff, which is fun.
So it's my own fault for not seeing him then, because I'm constantly. I think both of those are on my watch list.
Yeah, Future Man is definitely a sci-fi comedy, like just a bizarre time travel comedy show. And The Boys, of course, is just a crazy, you know R-rated superhero show. So
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a yeah, you got to sit down and watch those though. At least The Boys, because The Boys is really fun.
Yeah, I keep meaning to get to the boys, and then it's just been so much stuff has come out this year. I
Oh
feel
man.
like I finally watched I felt really bad because I finally started Wednesday and Chucky. If you can, it took me like a full year to get around to starting Chucky, and it's like, oh my God.
Oh wow. Well, I've been
Oh,
waiting for season 2 to finally drop on Peacock, but it hasn't, as far as I know. I haven't checked today, but as far as I know, it still hasn't
I don't think
dropped on
it's
Peacock, which is really bothering me because last season it dropped the day after the last episode aired. And so I was like, okay, this is cool. But so far, I'm still waiting for it to show up. And it's really frustrating because I want to see it. And I've been trying to avoid spoilers this whole time. And it's been tough, trust me, because
I,
people keep trying to post gifs and shit. So,
oh yeah, I believe it because I it took me so long. I didn't know it was I didn't have Peacock for a while. So like even when I got Peacock, I wasn't quite sure where to find it at first.
yeah.
But yeah, there's been so much stuff coming out and
Yeah, and I haven't even started Wednesday yet, so I need to get on that myself. But
um
yeah, so back to Tusk.
yes.
Yeah, Tusk is interesting because it apparently started out as a podcast episode on Kevin Smith's Smodcast that he did with Scott Mosier, and I was listening to that podcast for a good long while, but I think I must have stopped listening to it before I got to that episode, and so I never heard it. And but from what it sounds like it was a fairly bizarre, weird, episode, and then they decided, oh well, I'm just going to turn this into a movie. So, which is just it's a weird idea. Just finding some bizarre guy and having that guy turn you into a walrus. Um,
Yeah. It's definitely
and
it's an interesting I I didn't know that it started as a podcast thing. I think that's also it must have been a very strange episode just because it's already such a strange story and I think the visuals really sell it.
oh yeah,
So I'd be curious to see. And that I think it's one of the hardest parts of like pitching the movie to someone because it's
right.
like they turn him into a walrus and it doesn't sound as gruesome, I guess, as it is.
As it ends up being, yeah.
I might have to look up like the podcast episode because I'd be interested to see like how weird how much of the weirdness can get across without the visuals.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not sure. I have never listened to the episode myself. But and again, because I wanted to wait until I'd seen the movie, and
Right.
I just haven't jumped into listening to the episode either. But yeah, it's it's see, so Tusk is a body horror movie, and
Yes.
I tend to that's another reason why I didn't watch it, is because body horror just isn't my thing typically.
Hmm.
It's fine. I watch and enjoy some of them, like The Thing, but it just kind of depends on the individual movie for me. And so I'm usually less inclined to watch them if I know that they're body horror going in. Um, but uh but yeah, this is just, it's hard to talk about this movie. Um and I like, and I'm fine with spoiling stuff, obviously, but I I think that even if you say what is going on in this movie, which I mean we literally just did, Michael Parks's character turns Justin Long into a walrus.
Yeah.
Um it's hard to like, and pretty much anybody at this point knows that before they even watch Tusk. Um
Yes.
but you still have to watch it to experience it, because it is just so bizarre, that it's so difficult to understand without seeing it.
It really is. I think it's interesting that you had avoided it because it was a body horror movie. I'm not gonna say I avoided it for a long time because there was maybe at most a month in between me hearing about this and watching it for the first time. But I was hesitant to watch it though because I didn't realize that it was about, and this is such a dumb distinction. I but as someone that does like body horror, I thought that it was about a man that like turns into a walrus. I didn't realize it was about a man that turns a different man into a walrus. And it's like, I don't know why, but that second concept just sounded a lot more interesting to me. It's like I understand like creature features and stuff that you can turn into a walrus in a movie, but like turning someone else into a walrus, why?
Yeah,
Just why would
against
you
their will.
ever like
Yeah.
and I
And not through the
immediately
use of
had to
magic or
know
sorcery or something like that, like that you would typically think of in a horror movie, something like that. No, just somebody like literally like
surgically like
surgically turned him into a walrus somehow. Oh, yeah.
I just yeah, that just it was like as soon as I found that part out, it's like I have to see this. Like I need to know what's going on. And I'm so glad I did because it really is an experience. And I this is a body horror movie and it's kind of a
Oh,
silly one
yeah.
at that. Like
Yeah.
but there's that psychological element that I like that they played it up too, where it's like, what would compel a man to turn someone else into a walrus
Right.
as like chronically, like this is a
Yeah.
recurring. This is not the
Yeah.
first walrus, which was
He's
just
not the
an
first
element
one.
that I was not prepared for.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that this movie you would think would come off super silly, because of
Yeah.
that. But this part of the movie, because don't get me wrong, there's plenty of comedy in the movie, but this part of it is not inherently comedic. It is sad. It's it's very bleak and very depressing. Um
I had forgotten. So I'm glad that I got a chance to kind of I wish I could have sat down right before we did this and experienced it a little bit more. But it's like there are some elements that you forget about. And one of the things is like because you remember it being darker than what it sounds like to try and explain, but I didn't remember like how sad some of those moments really are. And like even at the beginning, where he mentions where Howe tells him he's like, you were bit by a spider, and when Justin Long, he's just like, there was no spider, was there? And it just like your heart kind of goes out to him, because he knows that it's not right. The story has never been very believable from the beginning,
right.
but like just that he has to ask, you feel so bad, and it's like, oh man.
Yeah. There's yeah, there's a whole thing going throughout the movie as well too, because he is involved with this girl and he goes out and goes to these uh interviews. He goes and interviews people for this podcast, and uh and then he cheats on her while he's gone. And but meanwhile, she is cheating on him with his friend and partner for the podcast. So, but you can tell that it's an interesting weird thing too, because she, even through all of that, she still loves and cares for Justin Long's character.
Yeah.
And so does the friend. Like it's a weird dynamic because it doesn't seem like, sure, they're hooking up and they're giving each other comfort and everything, but it's still, they still care for Justin Long's character and they're not trying to do something to hurt him.
And I think that it's really weird to say about Tusk of all movies, but there was a lot of emotional complexity because you can understand all of that. Like, I think they did a really great job portraying the different layers to this
Yeah.
dynamic between the three of them.
Right.
Um, which I think it was really fascinating. I think it also really speaks to the plot structure of Tusk because you kind of get all of this in the real time narrative, but then they also have these flashbacks, which I think a lot of other horror movies would have just not had those because you can
Right.
kind of get enough of the dynamic in real time. You see the fight that he's having with his girlfriend. You see, kind of the judgier aspect from the co-host.
Right.
And then you see them sleeping together. And these are all things that are happening in real time. But then they have these flashback sequences also where you kind of get that extra context about who everybody is. You
Right.
know, it,
Right.
and I think uh, they're all very powerful. I think the one that really gets me, and obviously it was supposed to, and I think there were a lot of movies where I would have felt kind of manipulated by this, but where it does cut back to her and she like talking about the difference between people and animals is the ability to cry, uh,
Yeah.
like leading into the ending where he's
Yeah. Yeah.
just uh the ending of this movie also, you could have
It's
given me a
brutal.
hundred guesses and I would not
Yeah.
have been able to tell you how this ends because
No.
like because it was rough.
Oh, so rough. It's brutal. It's so sad. And it's like, and there's part of it that he's trying to make funny.
Yeah,
But it it makes it so much worse.
it does. I think the big gulp, like the
Yeah.
fact that there's just a big gulp thing in the enclosure and you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
Like, because you're kind of supposed to laugh at it, but it just
Yeah.
hurts.
Yeah. It's, oh man, it's really a that's the funny thing is when you watch it, and like that's what's funny is like trying like you trying to get so many people to watch this and everything and everybody refusing to watch it is, I think people will enjoy it more than they think they will, because the
Yeah,
concept of the whole man becoming a walrus thing is so bizarre and so weird, that it it kind of pushes people away.
it
And like I said,
does.
it pushed me away for a while. And again, part of that is just from my own experiences with Kevin Smith's films also. So knowing the kind of movies that he did before and that I enjoyed a lot, and going into something like this would have been just like, a total, like, because that's the thing that happened with me with his previous horror movie Red State. Was I went in, I watched that, and that was such a 180, and that's a pure horror movie. There's no real
Yeah,
comedy in that. And so seeing that compared to his previous work, I was just like, what the hell, this is so bizarre and weird. And then, and I didn't like it at first. I was just like, okay, it's okay, but it's so weird that I just, it was off-putting to me. And then, he follows that up with Tusk, and then I'm just like, dude, when are you going to go back to making funny movies? And and so it's just like, what, but finally getting, finally sitting down to watch it for the podcast, I was like, okay, gotta watch this movie. And it's just, yeah, there's so many layers to this movie that is just like, it's funny, but it's like, it's almost cringe funny a lot of times too.
it
It's not,
is.
it's not, it's not funny. It's just like, you're like, these are, Justin Long's character is a horrible person. He's doing a horrible podcast. Like, why is his girlfriend and his friend even with him? Um, and then and that because I mean, obviously he's still kind of a good person, and that's what's good about it too, is like you see these layers to people, and that's how people really are. Um, but it's just it's just such a weird movie. But it's good because it's got all these deeper layers. And like you said, with that, flashback sequence, with the flashback sequences, that it helps to deepen the understanding and to, give you more context for everything else that goes into it. So
And the flashbacks, the other one I think was really interesting because there's the one really sad one leading into the just
yeah.
downer end of a film. But there was also I think one kind of funny one because they weren't all shedding light on they weren't all to make you feel worse for him. I think another really powerful, like very well placed one is actually like after the clerks have been calling him Mustache Man, and it kind of cuts back to just how much of a jerk he was in that interaction with them, which I think just like from a filmmaking perspective was really fascinating because that was a moment that we were there for, and that was kind
Yeah.
of the first flashback that, we had seen, but we hadn't realized we weren't seeing it in its entirety, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, exactly.
there's like a lot of, it's a well-made movie. It's silly, but it's very well made. It's very well
Yeah.
done. My one
What
complaint,
Go ahead. Yes.
oh yeah, my one complaint about Tusk, is Johnny Depp.
I was literally going to say this. This was literally what I was going to say. This was the only part I hated about this movie.
Uh, and I will say, like, and it's one reason I'm really glad, even if I didn't get to sit down and watch it, I'm glad I had it on in the background today because I wouldn't have thought to talk about it. I don't think before I watched it. I had blocked out how long that scene lasted. Like, I remember that Johnny Depp was in it. I remembered his character was my least favorite part, but
Right.
I had thought of it as like only a couple minutes, and it just that scene felt like it went on forever on the rewatch. It's
Yeah.
like, what is going on?
Oh yeah.
I think it might have just been one of those things though, where you get Johnny Depp for like this bit part in a role, and then as a filmmaker, especially around the time this was made, it's like you almost have to utilize Johnny Depp more if he's the biggest
Yeah.
name in your movie at the time. Like
Right.
I that must have been what was going on there, right? Because I don't think you
But
can
I
look
don't
at LaPont and be like, "This is I need more of him in my movie."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, part of it's because his daughter is um best friends with Kevin Smith's daughter. And they played the clerks
Mhm.
um at the thing. And so which leads into yoga hosers here in a minute.
Yeah.
Um but so I think that's largely what it was, well, our daughters are friends and I'm going to cast them in this movie. Would you like a weird little part, slather you in weird makeup and hide behind that or whatever, and just have, goof on whatever. And, Johnny Depp being Johnny Depp, you know, from, his past weird performances, seems like he's game for that kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
it wasn't surprising, but it was a very weird character, and the scene definitely goes on way too long.
It goes on way too long. And then like he also has a flashback that doesn't really inform
Yeah,
any of what's going on in the movie.
yeah, it's yeah, yeah.
Which,
It's
and it's
just
one of the, I like the character well enough. For Tusk specifically, I like the character well enough on paper, where it's like there's also a
yeah,
guy that like was dismissed from the police department that believes a guy is, surgically transforming victims. Like that, I think is
right,
an interesting enough thing on its own. It gives the friends a way to find Justin Long, but it's like, but in practice, it was
yeah.
just, it was so
Well,
much.
and it gives you somebody to give exposition and stuff too as well. But it's
Yeah.
but it's so much because of the character and the performance. If it had been played more straight, I
Yeah.
think that it would have worked better.
I do
And I
feel like
think
he was the only one like even though there are comedic moments, I feel like he was the only one there to shoot a comedy movie.
yeah, yeah.
Whereas like
Yeah.
everyone else was kind of taking it a bit more seriously.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. 100%. Yes.
but everything else about Tusk, I really it holds up surprisingly well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's actually a really good movie. It's well worth watching. Um, if if you have any interest in it, I would say definitely watch it. It's it's I can understand people not having an interest in it. That's fine. But
But
if you're
even
even
like a
mildly
little bit of
interested in it,
interest,
yeah,
because it's
definitely.
going to be better than you think.
Yeah, exactly. So, and even the Johnny Depp scene, as much as it's long and it's kind of weird, it's exposition heavy. So it's definitely something you have to watch to like to get
Yeah,
a little bit more background and stuff. So, but beyond that, but yeah, it's a great movie. It kind of runs the gamut of horror, comedy, just kind of uh, melodrama, all of it. It's a it's all a good grab bag of everything.
it is.
Which then, do you have anything else to say about
Oh no,
Tusk
I was just
specifically?
gonna say it's sequel though.
Yes. Okay. So one real quick, interesting fact is that or tidbit of information is that Kevin Smith, I heard it from Kevin Smith himself during the I got to see Clerks 3 during its convenience store, uh,
Mhm.
and he got up on stage and talked for like an hour afterward, and he somebody asked about future films that he's doing, and he laid out the next 5 movies that he's making, and one of them is a sequel to Tusk.
Okay, so I had heard that, but not from Kevin Smith himself. I just
Yeah.
heard rumors, which
Yes.
I'm excited about. Um,
Yes.
I'm gonna be honest. This is kind of an embarrassing thing to admit, going into this, but because it seems like something I should have been well aware of and had like remembered better. I think maybe I just blocked it from my brain. I think it was like a repression situation. I had forgotten until I watched it for this. So like just yesterday, I had forgotten that Yoga Hosers was in the same cinematic timeline as Tusk.
Yes.
I had just it was one of those things. I remember watching it. I remember it coming to Netflix and being like, "Oh, it's called Yoga Hosers. I have to watch it." I remember seeing Kevin Smith's name and getting excited. And then I just remember being so mad that it was like that I had completely forgotten that it but this I'm glad that Yoga Hosers is not the only Tusk sequel.
No. And there was actually a third movie called Moose Jaws that's supposed to be actually the third part of this True North trilogy. And that one is also coming.
Oh,
But
that's exciting.
he said that he said that that he is doing a sequel to Tusk called Tusks. So
Oh, very good.
yeah. So well, I mean, get give that how much it's worth, because like he said, it just kind of depends on what gets made when, uh
Yeah.
and so who knows when that will all happen. But yeah, but Yoga Hosers, it's okay. So here's my thing. I don't think Yoga Hosers is inherently that bad. It's definitely not something that I thought was super great. But it's just this weird, because it doesn't fit as much as it's in the same general area of Tusk. It doesn't share that in any way thematically or tonally. So it's a completely different weird comedy movie. Uh,
It
that's
is.
it's just fucking bizarre.
It really bothers me because on paper I should really like Yoga Hosers. I like just there are so many weird niche comedy like check boxes that this ticks off. And it's like I feel like I should really like it. I can't quite get there. It let
Right.
me down too many times. I do think I one big thing is I wish it had played a little bit more into the horror of it.
Yeah.
I think this would have been a really good comedy, uh, a la like Puppet Master, but like it
Yeah.
doesn't. It focuses on the comedy, and then a little bit there's like a horror premise in the middle, and then it kind of shifts to mystery, and like it just there's a lot of like weird little it can't quite decide what it's doing, and that bothered me a little bit. The
Yeah.
comedy also doesn't always land,
No.
which is, and some of it, again, like on paper, should be really funny. The cast was amazing for this. They got
Yeah.
people that I really enjoy to do this, and I one of the funniest things to me in this movie is in the flashbacks, like during the history class, they keep referring to them as Canadian Nazis, even though they're in Canada,
Yeah.
which just like, uh, that I thought was really good.
Yeah.
But for the most part, a lot of the jokes didn't really land.
Yeah, that's what the weirdest thing is about this movie for me is that, like you said, it should work.
It should.
There's so many pieces that should connect, but it's like the weirdest thing is like it's literally like pieces of a movie, pieces of a puzzle that should connect in the right way, but like they're put together just off center enough that it doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's a great cast. Adam Brody's in it. He's barely in it, but he's in it.
Yeah.
And he's funny. And it's there's yeah, it's just I think this was one of those instances where he was kind of trying to combine both parts of himself. He'd just done these two horror movies, and he was just like, okay, well, I'm going to continue down this horror vein in a way, but I'm also going to start adding in my old comedy stuff. But like, but it was so disjointed in the way that it worked that it just didn't work.
Yeah.
Um, it's and I think that you're right. I think most everybody in it's doing a good job. I
Yeah.
think that even Harley Quinn Smith and Lily Rose Depp are both good actresses. They're doing great in it. Um, but for some reason, the concept as a whole doesn't land. I think that's more it than anything else. It's not any one thing really that
Yeah.
messes it up. Like I wish I could say, it's because of this or because of that. I will say that we get a lot more Johnny Depp in this one.
Yes.
And that sucks. And I like Johnny Depp, like not as a person,
But
but
he can act.
he
Like
can't
he's been
act.
good in stuff.
Exactly. And to see him acting in this and to be this, and it's even weirder this time because he's a caricature of the character from Tusk. It's,
Right.
he's got this mole that keeps moving places on his face. And like every time you see him, the mole is moved. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, it's a funny joke once or twice, but to do it throughout the whole movie it was just weird. It yeah, it was like I don't know. Have you seen any of Kevin Smith's, other comedy movies
I
before?
have.
Okay. So it's like it didn't really fit with any of that. Because I mean, even if you take out outside of the View Askew, movies that he did, he still did stuff like Jersey Girl and Zack and Miri that weren't part of that whole Jay and Silent Bob, section of movies. So he can make comedies that are good.
He can.
So it's just weird to see him make something that just doesn't land fully. And like I said, it's not a bad movie. It's just a weird, disjointed movie.
It's definitely it's a and yeah, it's honestly even rewatching it, I didn't hate it as much as I remember. 'Cause mostly I remember being disappointed with it.
Right.
Which I guess I still kind of am, but it's not nearly as bad as I had worked it up in my head, like since the last time I saw it. but it is strange that it doesn't work. And the more you think about it, the more it really feels like it should have. And I do think there's a big disparity in quality between this and Tusk. I have
Oh
this that I
yeah.
say like about a couple other like sequels where it's like this is I think the biggest quality and drop between like a first and second installation of a thing. It might be Tusk and Yoga Hosers though.
Yeah.
Like it's pretty high up the list. Because this
Yeah.
one, it does feel, I, I don't even want to call it like a parody of itself because it was so different. Like they went so far out of the box for this one. But like you said, like Johnny Depp feels like a character, like a caricature of the character he was already playing, and that's kind of how I
Yeah.
felt about the Colleens also was like.
Yeah.
Which I, to be fair, I don't know how they could have done that differently for the Colleens because they were very much
No.
like a comedy bit part. And if you give them a whole movie, there's no way to keep that energy without it feeling
Yeah.
sillier, you know? So it's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
but yeah, the whole thing just it I feel like it could have been really good. And I don't know what would have made there's only one thing I can think of that would have made it notably better. And it's a dumb complaint in the grand scale of all of the things that went wrong with it. It really bothered me that when they were killing the little like wiener Nazis that the blood was yellow. I
Oh yeah.
I don't know why that drove me up the wall because it's like I but it in another way it's also it felt like they were trying to make it less of a horror movie. Like I think if they had just gone ahead and used red, it at least would have been like, okay, here's an enemy, we're killing them, there's blood and guts, you know, but it
Right.
like even just something as simple as like which you know it kind of makes sense I guess if you're like killing little hot dog creatures you know I guess the guts don't really have to be red but it did make it feel like it was trying to be more of a comedy you know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think that overall, I mean, he was going for more of a comedic tone, less for horror. And probably because um Red State and Tusk probably didn't do that overly well. And so he was like, okay, well, I like playing with horror, but obviously, comedy, is what people are wanting. So let me just, throw this together. And I mean, I haven't listened to any of the backstory or anything about, the creation of this movie. So I don't know the motivations. But it feels like just a movie to goof off, um, and have fun. Giving his daughter a bigger role, and to have some fun, bringing in some friends, and just playing, just having a good time, goofing off with the movie, and just kind of it. That's what it kind of feels like to me. Is it kind of feels like he's throwing out all these random scenarios and sticking them together into a story, and trying to make it work.
It does
And
feel kind of like a concept board of a film you
yeah,
know like here are things that would be cool for a movie but then they're just like they're not really sewn together
yeah,
eloquently.
yeah. Mad scientist, like Nazi mad scientist, creates bratwurst, Nazis that tiny little bratwurst Nazis that it's just like, okay, that's one concept, and then we're going to stick it in with the the Colleens. We're going to give them a bigger story, and and
There's
for
like a
some reason they
Satanist
really
arc and
yeah, and for some reason they really like yoga, and oh, we're going to bring Justin Long in to be the yogi, and we're going to name him Yogi Bear. That'll be a funny thing, that he's fighting with Hanna Barbera over that or whatever. And it's like, okay, kind of funny, but like on top of everything else going on, just felt really like it felt like really crappy comedy,
it
at times, that like it's he was trying way too hard with it.
It did. And they also like it starts as kind of like a Scott Pilgrim thing also. Like they have the title cards for everyone. They're in a band. And I just thought
Yeah.
for sure that like the both times even I thought the band thing was going to come back around more because it seemed like
Yeah.
a big deal, but like they didn't that and I think it's just little things like that, you know, like they were trying to go to a party, but it's like they could have been trying to go to a gig. We could have tied this back together
Yeah.
with like stuff that we know about them. Alternatively, they didn't have to be in a band at all. We could have seen them doing yoga earlier in the movie, you know, because
Right.
they're just like in a band and singing. And then I think Natasha, what's her name?
Oh, Natasha Lyonne.
Na
Yeah.
Natasha Lyonne, like she calls them yoga hosers before you even see them in a yoga class, and you're like, what is happening?
Yeah, it's just, oh man, it's just a bizarre movie. It's not a bad movie though. Like I want to make sure that people understand that it's not a bad movie, and it's not like it's not unwatchable. You just have to know going in, I think, that it's very silly, very over the top in parts, and it could have been a better movie.
Yeah, setting your expectation for this one doesn't like definitely helps because the
Yeah.
rewatch was a lot easier for me than I was afraid it was going to be.
Yeah.
That first time, like thinking it was going to be better executed, and I was like, I just the disappointment that came over me seeing Yoga Hosers for the first time, and it's like it really isn't. I I know I've seen movies worse than this. I'm
Oh
sure I've
yeah.
probably seen a dozen movies worse than this year. Like,
Yeah.
but
And
it could have been
there's
better.
movies that are worse than this that I love. So,
Oh,
you know, that's
yeah.
that's the thing. Whereas like, there's worse movies that I enjoy uh even more than this. And so it's one of those things where it's a good movie. It's not a great movie, but it's a good movie and it's still worth checking out. But definitely keep your expectations low and just know going in that it's kind of messy.
This is like if you ever want to get high and watch a movie about
Yeah.
yoga, this would be the time to do it. Don't go in expecting Tusk, though.
Yeah.
This is maybe
No, I
something that
do.
you cheer your and I wonder if that wasn't like a small part
Yeah.
of the intention also, because it's like this is something you could watch to cheer yourself up after watching Tusk potentially, because
Yeah,
it's a
could
lot
be. Yeah.
sillier.
Well, and I think this movie also could be one of those movies that is intended to be watched while high,
Yeah.
while or with friends, where
Mhm.
you can riff on a movie. And and part of that may be because uh Kevin Smith is a notorious weed smoker, and so it's possible that he wrote this while super high.
I was gonna say it
And
might have been something that was made while I
yeah, it feels like that a lot. So, but yeah, it's a fun movie. It's got some fun moments. It's got some good moments. It's not like I said. It's a fun movie. It's definitely worth checking out. Uh, keep your expectations low. Enjoy it for what it is. And yeah,
yeah.
that's really all I have to say about it.
I would like sometime I would like to get, you know how they have like doctor reacts and lawyer reacts videos on YouTube. I would love to get an actual like yoga professional to comment on all the different warrior poses
Right.
from
How
this.
accurate they are.
Yeah. I feel like some of these are not real yoga. I can't confirm,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
have my
Yeah.
suspicion.
Yeah. Yeah. I do know yoga myself, so I would have no basis in uh, judging that.
But
But yeah, they're both good movies. Definitely worth checking out. Both of them. Um, Tusk, I think, is the better movie. It's bizarre and weird, and that is part of its charm for it. Um, and just know going in that it's bizarre and weird. Uh, in a body horror way, in a you know melancholy way in a lot of ways. So It's
Uh,
definitely sad at times.
you also said this is just kind of a strange. You said that if anyone had any interest in Tusk to like check
Hmm.
it out, which I agree with. I also say like if you ever had any curiosity about Human Centipede, but it was just a little bit
Yes.
too over the top for you, Tusk is a
Yeah.
fantastic alternative.
There you
I
go.
think it's the better movie. It
Yes.
might not be as medically accurate, but
I I admit I have not seen Human Centipede, and I have no desire to see the Human Centipede movies.
if you were a
So
little bit
yeah,
curious,
yeah,
I feel like Tusk hits a lot of those same notes without being quite as um there's not as
grotesque.
much gross out
Yeah,
moments in Tusk.
yeah. That's why I feel. That's why I've never really cared to even explore the Human Centipede stuff. Is just like they're
Yeah.
obviously just going gross for gross. It's they're going
Yeah.
for the gross factor more than anything.
I do
Yeah,
wonder
sorry.
though, like if that's where one of the things from because Tusk had kind of that same tone, and then they brought Nazis up in the second one, and there was always that part of my brain, that's
Yeah,
like, I wonder.
it's quite possible. Yeah,
Before we go, I do have a question for you.
sure.
What is, because and I'll stick to this opinion. It's a crazy opinion to have, but Tusk
Okay.
is still my favorite Kevin Smith movie.
Oh
What
wow.
would have been your favorite part of the, because I said I was coming in for the best part of it.
The favorite part of Tusk or favorite Kevin
Favorite part
Smith
of
movie overall?
the Kevin Smith movie series that you've been doing, because I hopped in.
Oh, it's hard to say. I'm trying to think right now. I think I always go back to the ones that I always go back to are Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back and Mallrats.
Hmm.
Those are two of my favorites. Mallrats was my first one that I saw of his, and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back is a nice culmination of everything up until that point, um, of the Viewisk universe and Jay and Silent Bob uh, movies up until that point. So that's a fun one. But I do really enjoy like the more recent Jay and Silent Bob reboot, and Clerks 3 are really good because they're nice look back at everything that you know Kevin Smith growing older and contemplative and stuff. So it's nice to see those as well. So I'm kind of all over the place. I like most of his stuff.
Yeah,
It's
nice.
kind of hard for me to judge, but yeah, which was a good question on the last episode. So thank
Yeah. Well, I wanted to know because I knew that coming in, for my favorite Kevin Smith movie, I knew that was going to be I kind of
yeah,
a hot take because this is not Tusk is not what he's known for apparently.
no, no, more of the Clerks for sure.
I think on that note, I think Clerks was probably the first Kevin Smith movie I ever saw. I had seen Clerks and Mallrats both before I saw Tusk,
Right,
but again, it was just one of those things like I didn't pay a lot of attention to directors at
right.
the time. Uh, so yeah, but even still, I think Tusk is my favorite.
All right. Yeah. Well, I mean,
It's just
given
so
that
crazy.
you're big in horror and
Yeah.
that's been, your lifeblood for a while, that makes sense, especially coming to it like that. So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
But
All
thank you for
right.
having me on.
Yeah. Thanks for
Giving
coming
me
on.
an excuse to watch one of my favorite movies. It's just so weird. I love it so much.
Well, I appreciate it very much. Let people know where they can find you online.
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at cat_voleur, VOLEUR. You can also check out my website, catvoleur.com. And
All
oh,
right.
the other two, you talked about this in the beginning, the other two podcasts that I'm on, Slasher
Yes.
Radio and This Horror Life.
Yes.
Pretty much wherever you
Definitely.
find podcasts.
Yes, definitely go check those out. All right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Definitely. Thanks again to Kat for joining me. Next episode is a special bonus episode that will be dropping this Thursday. My daughter Katrina and I got to see Clerks 3 during the convenience store. We will be talking about both the movie and the experience itself. Then, next week's regular episode, I will be joined by Jerry Smith for the first part of a Shane Black 2-part Christmas special. We will be talking about Lethal Weapon and The Last Boy Scout. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. You can follow the podcast on social media at Creepy and Geeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm Geek Thulu on Twitter and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more from our TeePublic page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.